Merry meet, Annie here. This video is in response to this week's Pagan Perspective topic on what I call the incoming, those sometimes awkward, sometimes disrespectful, or downright hateful incoming questions or accusations that we sometimes receive. Always awkward to deal with, but I would suggest not awkward in the nature of the incoming, but awkward in how we then decide what to do next. The greatest advice I ever received regarding this from one of my most respected teachers was, there's a choice to be made. And that choice is to engage in the conversation or not. That is, at the simplistic level, do it or don't do it. But it's much more sophisticated and difficult than that. What if the incoming is from a loved one or a family member or someone you care about? It can be a very difficult decision to decide what and if you want to engage in the conversation. But there is great power in knowing it is a choice. You decide how you're going to react. In my early pagan years, for the first couple of decades, I never had to deal with the situation because we saw ourselves as the hidden children of the goddess, and our business was no one's business. What we did was private from everyone that was not part of our circle. We saw the religion as intimate, as not something to be discussed outside that venue. The benefit for me was then, when I was in my late 30s, early 40s, I started getting out into the wider world and meeting more of a variety of pagans and getting more experience of faiths of all kinds. So those kinds of conversations, the incoming, began happening. And I was old enough that I had experienced a lot of awkward conversations on everything throughout my life that it was a little bit easier to deal with them than it would have been if I'd been in those same situations when I was younger. My litmus paper for these conversations is, where's the respect in it? If the person who is at the other end of that conversation is respectful, whether it is an assumption that I would like to correct, or whether they're asking questions, whatever it is that the incoming is, if it's respectful, and if I am able to be respectful in return, I will enter into the conversation. If that litmus paper test is that the incoming is not respectful, I leave it. And I appreciate it is not always easy, and in fact sometimes takes great courage to leave it, to walk away from it, to let it be. So I first would say it's a choice. Know what's rising up in you in response to the incoming, and whether there is value in your participating in the discussion to yourself or to the other person. It should be an exchange, and you can walk away from it. The second thing I would advise is speak of your own experience. I use the example that if you had never heard of Christianity and you met your first Christian and asked them in 2 sentences to tell you everything about the history of the religion, everything they believe, and what they do and why. It's too vast. When someone comes at you with a question, let it be personal. Answer from what you do personally. Build the answer from the most simple level. You need to take those conversations to the place that's appropriate to each of them. You cannot always assume you're speaking to an intellectual peer. You cannot always assume that you're speaking to someone who can grasp the idea of spirituality beyond the only one they know. You can take the level of the conversation to wherever it needs to be complete for that particular conversation. You're not speaking to the masses, and you're not representing the masses. That would be my second piece of advice. My third piece of advice actually is from my own experience. Those first 2 things are things that teachers suggested, in which over the years I have said, you know, they're right. Those 2 things that's the 2 things that are important about those kind of exchanges. The third thing I would suggest in this modern day of paganism, where we are more present in community and not as cloistered as we were in my early days, I think it's important that we have a sense and an understanding of all the faiths in the world in which we move. When we have an understanding of what any one of the mainstream religions are at their most beautiful level, and we will meet people in our lives that are examples that live that, and we get to know them, and we might work with them and accomplish things in community, work with them in politics, all the different ways that you mix and mingle. If you have an experience that includes what these religions can be at their highest, I would say, I'd refer to it that way, at the best they can be, the place that comes from love in each of those religions, it makes it a lot easier to have a radar that turns on when a question is coming at you from a fundamentalist that really doesn't want to know the answer. There's an agenda of proselytizing or lecturing that is part of the incoming at times. If you have a wider understanding of religion, and not just your own, you recognize that rather quickly, and you just need to walk away from it. At least that is my advice. And this is coming from a person who has no need to defend or preach or proselytize from her end. We all have different needs. We all have different things that come out of us in conversational exchanges. And I certainly have weaknesses in other areas, but I have no need to defend. And it does go back to me, it's deeply personal. And there's nothing to defend. And for the curious and the respectful, I'm willing to share and have a conversation. Interestingly, I have had probably my most awkward moments of incoming have been in two venues that almost broke my heart, in the sense that what rose up into me was pure emotion and response, and that would be when I started becoming more active in the wider pagan community, incoming sometimes from neo-Wiccans or more modern pagans, made an assumption about what traditional Wiccans were that was the equivalent of our viewers saying, what do you say when a Christian asks if you believe in Satan? Some of my incoming, especially 10 years ago or so, when traditional Wiccans were starting to mix and mingle and meet more neo-Wiccans, some of the incoming was coming from people I thought were my brothers and sisters. There's a lesson in not letting the emotions rise up and having an opportunity for an exchange that's non-emotional there. And also, I love my Unitarian Universalist brothers and sisters so much, but my particular church had no experience of paganism. Some Unitarian Universalist churches have a lot of nature-based practitioners, and mine just happened not to. And early on in that church, I was being put on the defensive, because one of the misunderstandings, I think, to me it's more so than the do you believe in Satan. The question I get the most often is, do you believe in God? And by that, the person who's asking is thinking that if we are heathen or pagan, we do not believe in the divine or the sacred or holy, and that there's no spiritual aspect to our practices. And there were a couple of times early on in my Unitarian Universalist community that the incoming felt like an attack, like, why are you here? You don't believe in anything. So I think we need to be aware that it comes from us, it comes from all different places in our life and throughout the times of our life. I do think that the most difficult times are when it's loved ones or family, and that the great courage to decide in the face of that how we're going to handle it and know that we have a choice is probably, I think, the most difficult experience of the incoming. There's a little bit about how it's been for me over my life when it comes to these kinds of things. Yes, there have been awkward moments. There have been moments I let myself, out of emotion or a feeling of being attacked, responded in kind, that nothing good ever came of that for me. And I think I've learned over the years the way I need to handle it. Make a decision, speak from the heart, and understand a bit about the perspective of the person who is asking you the questions. I wish you mirth and reverence. Mary Part.